We've grown quite organically over the years as an artistic community, and to begin with it was just the group of us that moved in, but very quickly through bandmates and people that would come through to use the studio, we've actually grown a huge community.
Yo, don't pretend to miss the drop like me if you see somebody doing show. Alright, come on, course.
A lot of people come through and use this space, either the studio here or book gigs next door, or we've had art installations, boiler rooms and all sorts of things. So our reach, the Rising Sun Collective as we call it, is a lot of people now, and a lot of people make use of this space, which I think is fantastic. And what we're trying to do now is preserve it.
Can't quantify human emotion. Some of my feelings are unexplainable.
Basically, a little while ago, when these guys got served their notice, me and Scott got our heads together and ended up making the co-op as a way of taking ownership over the property and retaining what we have here as a creative community. We were advised by a friend to get incorporated as a co-op, and that was a way of, you know, people getting a mortgage collectively, and it wasn't based on any individual's financial situation. It was based on the collective and the sustainability of a model of people paying rent for this building. So we are a cooperative as it stands, but the hurdle that we're facing at the moment is we need financial assistance in order to acquire the property.
Honestly, like, it's one of the most like distinctive spaces I've had to write in. Like, from the look to the resources to the general spacing, you don't really have much other places like it, to be honest. It's made me so comfortable, so comfortable. And I think being an artist as well, like, comfort in music is such an important factor.
I think the studio and the space is special because it is a reflection of the community around it, and it is unique because the community is unique. It's such a nice group of people and a group of creatives that you just don't get anywhere else. I think sometimes, especially when you write, when you arrange track, if you are in some sort of very clean-cut environment, you don't get that sort of little, you know, distinctive identity that, you know, everyone is sort of looking for.
Being able to work with people that not only I get to like accommodate myself with inside of the house, and then being able to work as a musician as well is really important. So I just really like the fact that, yeah, we get to be able to congregate so closely and it be such a supportive environment. So it's really helped me excel and just feel comfortable getting back into the routine of being an artist as well.
I kind of came to this space through the underground like music scene. I think it's kind of changed a lot recently during COVID. The space is being used out a lot more by lots and lots of different people. We're a space that has just been really accessible for people locally to come down and do things that they used to do in other places that have been shut. Every week we've got like a random new group of people that are using the space and that we've got to know, which has been super lovely.
Like Remy was saying, it's such different vibe, and you can get some interesting things from different places, but being here, I think, is a reminder that staying unique and try to connect with your identity is the most important.
The effects that have felt from how the collective, you know, makes work, and all the people that we touch from it, it's extremely far-reaching. I think it's just come at a real moment for London where people are just like, how can I gain some control over my future? And this is just a bunch of people being like, right, this is how we can.
Yeah. Hey.
What's unique for us is that we not only are trying to create affordable housing, but we've got a creative community surrounding us that we're also trying to sustain.
I feel like affordable housing and this cooperative, collaborative approach to making music and making art are two sides of the same coin. If you look at Berlin, they have lots of housing co-ops there. Our culture feels very different in London, but I don't think that legislation needs to change. I don't think that it's down to the government to actually change things. Of course, they could do a lot to help, but I think real change is going to come from us just doing stuff like this.
The Rising Sun is special because it's completely community-owned asset, really. You know, everything's highly democratic. That's something that's also, you know, integral to this cooperative existing, is the fact it's a democratic process. There's no boss overruling and nobody driving it in any direction particularly. We're just all pitching in and creating. You know, it's taken a hell of a lot of work to get to this point. It would be such a detrimental loss to South London if we can't keep this place going.
I think it needs people to take a leap of faith and say, you know what, we can actually take control of our living situation. We can also find time then to invest in the culture of this city. And there's no reason that through new housing models we can't actually change the cultural landscapes of our cities.